This video is made possible by Second Call Defense. Second Call Defense provides immediate, upfront legal protection for a member who is forced to use any legal weapon for self-defense. So protect yourself today with Second Call Defense. I did. You'll find the link in the description. Hi, I'm Joel Persinger. I'm the Gun Guy. Thank you very much for all of your support of GunGuyTV. I am super grateful for everything that you do, and I'm very grateful to bring you continuing good news about the Second Amendment. Today we're going to talk to Cam Edwards from Cam & Company and BearingArms. If you're not a reader of BearingArms, I urge you to be one. And if you don't watch or listen to Cam's show, please look in the description. I'll remind you later to do that again because his show is incredible. And Cam's a really good guy, so he's a good guy to support. Now, before we go talk to Cam, I do want to remind you to check out these alternative locations where you'll find my videos, because YouTube and Vimeo in particular do delete me every once in a while, and most recently they did. They deleted an entire interview I did with Rick Travis because we said one thing they disagreed with. Well, that happens. So check out Rumble, BitChute, any of these other locations, and that way, if that happens again, you'll be able to watch the video over there. Now, likewise, I do have an email list, so if you want to be on the email list so that every time I publish a video, I can send you an email just to let you know it's there, then you're welcome to join that. You'll find the link in the description as well. And lastly, I would suggest that you listen to the podcast, because I do an audio podcast you'll find on your favorite podcast player, and I think it's also on Amazon Music, believe it or not. All right, let's go talk to Cam Edwards from Cam & Company and BearingArms and find out what's going on around the nation in response to the latest SCOTUS decision in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen. Cam, thank you very much for joining me again. I really appreciate it. I know this schedule is, to put it mildly, nuts. I don't know about you, but man, this decision came down from the Supreme Court and my phone blew up, my email blew up. I was talking to Rick Travis at CRPA. His stuff blew up. I haven't been able to reach Eric Pratt. I know they're running around. You've got to be experiencing the same thing. But I've got you here, and because you keep your finger on the pulse of it nationally, I'm probably going to have to ask you exactly one question, and then I'll be able to shut up the entire interview. And that question is, take a deep breath so you can get it all out in one breath.
Okay.
What's happening around the country now that SCOTUS has essentially taken the shall issue or may issue scheme and thrown it in the trash?
Okay. Well, so here's the thing. In most states around the country, nothing has changed, because most states around the country were already shall issue, right? So this is, I think, appreciated in most of the country, but there aren't going to be any big sweeping changes. It's those may issue states where the Democrats are flipping out right now and trying to come up with a way that satisfies the letter, and maybe even the lowercase letter of the law laid out by Justice Clarence Thomas, while completely violating the spirit, and I would argue actually violating the Bruen decision itself. So New York is coming in for an extraordinary session on Thursday. Governor Kathy Hochul has called them back into session. We don't have specific legislative language to look at yet, but apparently the New York Times spoke with Hochul, and she's talking about, just like Clarence Thomas warned about it, said, listen, you can't turn basically the entirety of New York City into a sensitive place. But that's in essence what Kathy Hochul wants to do. She wants to ban, for instance, just a blanket ban on concealed carry in private businesses. And then owners, if they want to allow it, can opt in. But the de facto position of the state of New York is any private business, you're not allowed to carry. She specifically wants to make it even, I guess, illegaler to carry in places like stadiums, perhaps even restaurants that serve alcohol. Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey has brought that up, but he too wants a blanket ban on carrying in private businesses. They're talking about banning firearms on public transportation. So, working class gun owners, you're hosed, right? If you can afford to drive a car in New York City, or maybe you can afford a car service, all right, maybe you get to carry a firearm in self-defense. But if you have to take the train or the subway, you're out of luck. That's what they're looking at here. They're also looking at imposing onerous training requirements. Out in California, they're talking about Attorney General Rob Bonta sent out a letter to law enforcement talking about, hey, listen, be sure to use that good moral character clause. You know, you can't use justifiable need anymore, but boy, that good moral character clause is pretty open-ended and subjective. So make sure you take full advantage of that. So, you know, we're not seeing any real recognition that the Second Amendment is a real right.
No, as a matter of fact, just you know, I was talking to Rick Travis today, and he was testifying in the Senate earlier today, and he said he was having a conversation with, he was testifying. I guess he was in the middle of his testimony, and something came up, and he said, "Well, no, that's not going to stand." And one of the senators, who's more liberal, I suppose, said, "Well, I don't care because owning a gun is a hobby." No, it's a right.
It could be a hobby, I suppose, but you have a right to that hobby because you have a right to keep and bear arms. And that's the thing. I mean, this is the left, broadly speaking. I know that there are some pro-gun folks on the left, and I don't want to discount them. I think they're actually really important. But broadly speaking, the anti-gun left refuses to recognize the text, the history, and the tradition of the right to keep and bear arms in this country. You know, the three things that Clarence Thomas just said courts have to look to determine whether or not a gun control law is constitutional. They view the text of the Second Amendment as outdated and irrelevant. They view the history and tradition of the right to keep and bear arms in this country as a wrong, not as a right. And they look at it as something to be eradicated, not as something to be protected. And so, yeah, I mean, listen, this was a great decision. That's the thing. I don't want to undercut what Bruen said, what it meant, and what it ultimately will do. For folks who know me, I'm not a bomb thrower. I'm not the guy who, pounds on the table and yells and screams.
Yeah, me either.
But so I feel this is, I want to make sure that people understand this is not a hyperbolic statement that I'm about to make. I really, truly believe this. I live outside of Farmville, Virginia. Which is a great little town. I love it here. But Farmville has a very shameful past. Brown versus Board of Education. In terms of, that came out of Topeka, right, to Kansas. But there were actually a number of cases that have been filed by the NAACP that were sort of wrapped into what became Brown versus Board of Education. And most of those cases actually came from Prince Edward County, Virginia, Farmville, Virginia. Because there were students, Barbara Johns was chiefly among them, who said, listen, this tar paper shack that we have to go to for our high school is not equal to the high school that the white kids get to go to here. And so we want to sue for our rights. When Brown versus Board of Education was decided, Farmville, Virginia, Prince Edward County, Virginia shut down their public schools for 5 years rather than integrate. I've talked to guys who went to school in church basements because the existing power structure wouldn't recognize their right to go to a public school with white kids. And so when I see Democrats from Gavin Newsom to Kathy Hochul to Joe Biden refuse to recognize this right, knowing full well that by doing so, they are depriving tens of millions of Americans of the full flower of their civil rights and their ability to protect themselves and their families. And a burden, I would admit, that will disproportionately fall on people who live in urban areas and people who are poor and minorities. Those are the folks who get disproportionately arrested for possessory gun offenses. And that's going to continue to be the case. And these Democrats are fine with that, as long as they don't have to acknowledge our right to keep and bear arms.
Oh, it bugs me too. Greg Gutfeld said the other day I think on the 5, I happened to catch it. I don't get to watch television a whole heck of a lot. I'm busy doing other things, but I did watch it. It's been a week or two ago. And he said there's nothing more dangerous to a minority than a rich white liberal because they can experiment with them. And I thought about that statement, and I thought, he wasn't trying to, a lot of times that guy's trying to be funny. He wasn't trying to be funny. Look, I'm kind of like you. I try not to be hyperbolic. I try not to be the guy who throws spitballs and stirs up angst and stirs up anger and all that kind of stuff. But I've become convinced, and this is just my opinion, and certainly everybody can disagree with me. I was raised to agree to disagree and not be disagreeable. But I'm convinced that these people just don't care. They just don't care. They don't care about the folks who aren't in their sphere, that aren't the elitists in their sphere. And I say elitist, I don't mean elite. There's an awful lot of very wealthy people who would be considered elite who are not elitist. But I'm talking about the elitist folks who don't care about anybody but themselves. I mean, and the California stuff is an example of that, as are New York and New Jersey. But I was thinking about the things you were talking about. Good moral character, that whole thing, that's extremely subjective. Who decides what's good? Is it that you agree with them or agree with me or what? That's just very subjective. And I remember the days when, I've had a concealed carry permit here in California for about 30 years, and I used to have to come up every time with 3 letters of reference from people I knew who lived in the county to attest to my moral character. And I hope that we don't go back to that nonsense. I don't think that'll stand up in court now. They want to increase the cost. They want to expand the sensitive areas to be just about everywhere, except your front porch, and you never know, that might be sensitive by the time they get done. They're talking about requiring that you have insurance before you can carry. I know of no other constitutional right that requires you to have insurance.
No. Do you have to carry libel insurance?
Right?
Before you.
I mean, that's what they're talking about. It's just. So I asked earlier today, I had an opportunity to talk to an attorney, and I asked him, looking at these things they're proposing, what he felt would actually withstand a court challenge, and he said almost none of it.
Yep.
And so that begs the question, and I know what my opinion is. I'd love to have yours. If they know, and they have to know, I mean, you've got to be a blithering idiot. You've got to live in a cave. You've got to have not read the decision, and I did, and you did, I'm sure, and I've read all the concurring decisions and the dissents and everything else. You've got to have not read Heller, not read McDonald, and not read Bruen to fail to understand that these things that they're trying to pass and trying to put in effect are not going to withstand a court challenge, and yet they're doing it anyway. And the question is, why?
So, I think what we have just talked about, the fact that they still refuse to recognize this as a right, and so they are offering up their own form of massive resistance to this Supreme Court decision and any other that respects our right to keep and bear arms in self-defense. But I wonder, honestly, Joel, I wonder how many of them are engaged in this fantasy that, and maybe not even a fantasy. I mean, listen, that they are enthralled by this scheme to pack the court the next time they are in power and have the ability to nuke the filibuster. And they'll put 5, anti-gun justices on there, and they will restore Roe versus Wade, and they will overturn Heller and McDonald and Bruen, and they will get their revenge. And I think that is, I think it's a far-fetched plan. I wouldn't, if I were a gun control advocate, I wouldn't stake my agenda on it. But I'm a rational person, and I don't think that they're thinking really rationally right now. I think they're lashing out. I think that they are desperate. And I think that sounds like a very comforting idea to them that, well, you know what, if we just keep resisting until we are in a position to overturn these decisions, then we can limit the damage done by allowing all of these average, ordinary Americans to own and carry around these guns.
But even this stuff that they're coming up with, I was curious. I had to go back this morning and read the decisions again to see if Thomas had dealt with these sort of expanding things like prices going up, or let's increase the price, let's make sure that you can't go in the restaurant, and that kind of stuff. I think it's in a footnote, but it's in the notes of his decision. It says, because any permitting scheme can be put toward abusive ends, we do not rule out constitutional challenges to shall-issue regimes where, for example, lengthy wait times in processing license applications or exorbitant fees deny ordinary citizens their right to public carry. And then I found in Kavanaugh's concurrence, unlike New York's may issue regime, those shall issue regimes do not grant open-ended discretion to licensing officials and do not require a showing of some special need apart from self-defense. As petitioners acknowledge, shall issue licensing regimes are constitutionally permissible, subject, of course, to an as-applied challenge if a shall issue licensing regime does not operate in that manner in practice, in actual practice. So they plugged, I mean, I don't know, you've read it. What are your thoughts on that? It seems to me they plugged every hole in this.
Yeah, they did. And it's interesting to bring up the Kavanaugh concurrence because I think it was the New Republic had a piece a couple of days ago, like seizing on the first part of that quote is saying, look, Kavanaugh was saying this decision was limited. And they just left that part out. They left the part out about, as applied challenges. And which, of course, completely changes the context of what, Kavanaugh was saying. He wasn't saying this case is limited or this only to this particular question. And this ruling only applies to this particular question. He was saying, again, if there is abuse of the shall issue system, well, those abuses can be challenged in court as well. And that's exactly what we're going to be seeing here over the next few months, Joel, are these blue state legislators imposing all kinds of new restrictions on shall issue that are specifically designed to suppress the number of concealed carry holders. And that's ultimately where all of this falls apart for them, because Clarence Thomas made it clear the public has a general right to carry in public. And anything that is, again, designed to minimize the number of concealed carry holders. I think it was Brandon Scott, the mayor of Baltimore, was talking about, we're going to continue to do everything we can to, keep the number of people carrying guns to a minimum. Well, how well is it working out for Baltimore, by the way, with 8 straight years now of 300 plus homicides? We're on pace for year number 8. If any of these provisions can be shown that the main effect will be to depress the number of concealed carry holders and not to actually, weed out violent felons or those who've been adjudicated as mentally defective, these laws aren't going to stand. And frankly, even if they could say, well, there is a rational basis, or we've narrowly tailored this law specifically to look for those violent felons, unless there's some sort of historic analog in our nation's history at the time of the ratification of the Second Amendment or at the time of the ratification of the 14th Amendment, under Thomas's test, those laws have to go away. I mean,
they absolutely do. And there is no more rational basis, intermediate scrutiny, or strict scrutiny. That was thrown out specifically by Justice Thomas and by this decision. And they still use those types of things in other cases for other things. If you read the decision they just published for Coach Kennedy there and in his ability to pray at the 50-yard line, they actually did go through the scrutiny issue and use those things, but not in Second Amendment cases anymore. I was talking to Chuck Michel about this some time ago, and he said a couple of things. One, he said, if the court does what we suspect they will do, which, by the way, they did. He and Steve Holbrook pretty much sat on my show and said, we think they're going to do this and this and this and this and this and this and this. And that's what they did. And if they did that, then this was a hard reset of Second Amendment jurisprudence. It's as if somebody unplugged the Second Amendment and all of the subsequent prodigy of laws, and then plugged it back in again, and it completely reset. And now we have a brand new foundational structure on which to build. And it's not limited to the carry issue.
Oh no, not at all.
This reset and detailed instructions given to lower courts as to basically Thomas said, you will no longer do that, you will do this. You didn't get it right the first time, apparently, so let me square you away. You will no longer do that, you will do this. And so every case, unless you end up with an activist judge who just refuses to do it, and there are always those, but every case going forward with regard to the Second Amendment has to be settled on a two-test basis, one being, does the plain language of the amendment protect the conduct in question? And if it does, then the government, not the people, the government then has to prove that there is a textual, historical, and traditional analog that would justify the law. And if they cannot do that, the burden of proof is on them. If they cannot do it, that law doesn't stand. That's my understanding. Now, I haven't had Chuck on the show yet because he's been running around all over the place, but I wouldn't be surprised if you've spoken to him. But that's my understanding on it. What are yours?
Yeah, no, I think that nails it, honestly. We had Chuck on Cam and Company on Monday, and I just confirmed he's coming back on tomorrow to talk about the data breach from the Attorney General's office there in California. But no, I think you got it spot on, Joel. And that's the thing. I mean, this argument's already emerging. So Monday, the NRA in the state of Florida submitted supplemental briefs in the case that NRA filed challenging the under 21 gun ban. So in California, after Parkland, they passed a law, you got to be 21 to buy a firearm, any firearm. NRA sued. And this is really, I think, the first opportunity we've had to see how states defending gun control laws are going to try to comport to that text and history and tradition test. And the state of Florida, I mean, listen, I got to tell you, I feel really good about this law being overturned because the state of Florida's historical analog to barring every adult under the age of 21 from purchasing a firearm at retail was, well, there are longstanding laws that bar violent felons and those adjudicated as mentally defective from purchasing firearms.
And that might have flown before when they could get away with the rational basis crap, but it isn't going to fly now.
No, because you're talking again about a narrow slice of the population versus everybody within a particular age group. So that's just not going to fly. And if that's their best argument, listen, here's the thing. Not only we've said for years, Joel, that we've got the Constitution on our side. We also have history and tradition on our side.
You bet. Absolutely.
Saul Cornell has a piece at SCOTUS blog that I read today, and he's complaining about, this is baloney because, history is complex, and how do you prove a negative, and how do you show if something was widespread? And look, I'm a lover of history, and one of the things I love about it is the more you read, the more you learn, and you can just keep peeling those layers back. However, Clarence Thomas also talked about this in his opinion too, and he noted that if you've only got in a nation the size of the United States, a half dozen local laws over the span of a century that deal with a particular firearm regulation, that's not a widespread or something that is within the tradition or the history of the Second Amendment. That's just not so. If you've got laws that were only in the books for a couple of years and then they were repealed, well, that's not a long-standing law. The fact is, all you have to do is look back at history. When did the gun control movement start? When did it start? Started. Well,
and I should point out too that he also said, no, you don't get to just look at the recent few decades and call that history. That doesn't work either. You have to get back before that.
Because that's the thing. That's when the gun control movement started. Right. There were no moms demanding action or I guess, maybe double action, single action. When Samuel Colt unveiled the revolver, right? There was no campaign to ban the AR or the Winchester repeating rifle, which was the AR-15 of its time. You just did not have those types of movements to ban entire classes or categories of firearms until the push to ban handguns, which began in the 1960s. And so those are not long-standing traditions.
I graduated high school in the 1970s, okay? And I went to a high school that was in a town of about 60,000 people here in San Diego County. And when I was going to high school, it was not uncommon for the football coach and the wrestling coach and some of the athletes to go hunting together before school. It was, we had an ROTC program where they had drill rifles, which I don't think functioned, but they had 22 rifles they practiced with all the time, and those were actually kept at the school. So this was not, this is even into the mid 70s, and that was still occurring, even in metropolitan areas in the state of California. So it's not, you can't look back at that. That's very recent history, sure. But you can justify anything if you only look back 2 years, or if you only look back 10 years, or if you only look back 30, you can say, well, I only want to look back this far. No, let's look back to 1791. Right. And before that, and shortly after that, let's look at the historical context, the traditional context at the time, and see where it went for the first few years after that and how was that addressed. And that's about as far as you can go. Even Justice Coney Barrett, she used a lot of legalese I didn't understand. But in her concurring opinion, she used that legalese to really narrow out okay, yeah, but when you're looking at history, you're only looking at this. And if you're looking at that, no, you're only looking at this. And so she even clarified it more. So this is going to be a very, very tough thing for these anti-gun politicians to really get around. That doesn't mean they're not going to try, and it's not going to cost a lot of money to battle with them, but it's going to be tough. I wanted to point out a couple things you talked about. People will inherently put in the comments, why isn't somebody suing about this stuff? Okay. These, let me see if I can get them on camera here. These are page after page after page listed in small, I don't know if I can get it where somebody can actually see it, but you can see it's a long list of all the current cases that are currently sitting in front of the Ninth Circuit, some other circuit court, the Supreme Court, waiting, fully argued in most cases, waiting to be decided upon. There are some sitting at the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit's just been holding on to, trying to figure out what the Supreme Court's going to do with this.
Yep.
So that becomes the question. Since you have talked to Chuck and I haven't, what happens with those cases? We got a couple of them sitting with the court now, waiting for the final closing conference. Mm-hmm. And we got some sitting at the Ninth Circuit and other circuit courts, kind of in abeyance, waiting. What now?
Yeah. So I was a little surprised because I figured that the court would resolve the four cases that are in conference on Monday of this week. Chuck, and I felt good because Chuck said he was actually a little surprised too. But no, apparently there is sort of a wrap-up conference that's generally where the final orders are released after all of the opinions have come out. So that may be coming next week at some point. Excuse me. So according to Chuck, he thinks the most likely outcome for the four cases that are before the court, you've got two mag ban cases, one out of California, one out of New Jersey. You've got challenge to Maryland's ban on so-called assault weapons. Then you got Young versus Hawaii, which is the open carry with a permit case.
Yeah, and I think the mag ban out of California is the Duncan
versus Bonna is that.
One out of New Jersey.
A&J RPC versus Platkin. Yeah. And then Bianchi versus Frosch is the Maryland semi-auto ban.
Semi-auto, which Maryland's ban is a feature ban, isn't it? Somewhat similar to California's.
Yeah. That's what and this is the case where the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals said that AR-15s are not protected by the Second Amendment because they are like machine guns. And Antonin Scalia said in Heller that machine guns and the like are presumptively not covered by the Second Amendment. So that was one of those little, the legal games that were played at the lower courts since the Heller decision came down. So Chuck thinks that all four of those cases are likely to be granted, vacated, and remanded. So they'll accept the cases. They will immediately vacate the lower court's decision and send them back down to the lower court for reconsideration in light of the Bruen opinion.
Every one of those cases, as far as my memory. Now, I'm in my mid-60s and my memory leaks, but hopefully I got this right. As far as I know, because of my memory, every one of those cases was decided based upon this weird strict scrutiny, intermediate scrutiny, rational basis thing, and none of them got the strict scrutiny. They all were in the rational basis, government interest weighing thing. So what did I would love to hear what Chuck had to say as far as prognosticating, but I suspect that in light of the new instructions,
I think he feels good.
They won't stand.
Yeah, I think he feels really good about all of those. There's also Rhodey versus Bonta, which is the challenge to the ammo ban in California. That I think he said they're waiting on the Ninth Circuit, and as you say, there are a number of these cases.
I think there's one called Reyna or whatever versus Bonta, isn't there? That's a handgun roster thing for California's handgun roster, or at least it was. I think that's sitting at the Ninth Circuit too. Right,
and a lot of these cases, as you say, have just been placed on hold because the appellate courts knew that Bruen was coming. So it was just sort of like, well, we don't have there's no hard deadline that these appellate courts have to meet to release a decision. They can sit on these things for as long as they want. So I think
when they got them, I didn't have gray hair. It's not that.
I didn't have this beard.
You didn't have a beard,
right?
Yeah, we were both in grade school. What's going on with that?
Exactly. So yeah, so that's the thing. I mean, I think again over the next couple of months there is going to be just a flurry of activity, both new lawsuits being filed in response to the Democratic reaction to Bruen, and then these lower courts releasing their decisions based on the new test laid out by Clarence Thomas. And I'm glad that you pointed out all this litigation report, because honestly, this is not going to be the last word from the Supreme Court. It can't be. I mean, there are going to be so many questions that are coming before the court, and each and every one of these cases that's brought by FPC or SAF or NRA or GOA, and apologies for leaving anybody out, most of these lawyers don't work pro bono. The other side, look, they've got in-house law firms at every town and at Giffords. I think Brady has their own legal fund too. The CSGV is partnering with Johns Hopkins University, right? They've got all kinds of institutional resources that we don't have. So my advice is, whatever group it is, find a group that's doing good legal work and kick in a couple of bucks if you can. Absolutely. Because this is a critically important time. The gun control advocates, as you know, they can read this decision as well as we can. They know what this means for their agenda. And they're going to pull out all of these stops to try to make it as hard as possible to actually implement what the Bruen decision actually means. And so we are going to have to be on our game. We are going to have to be in the courts. And it's going to take a lot of effort on the part of a lot of Second Amendment attorneys over the next couple of years to make sure that this decision sticks and has the full impact that it should have.
It's an interesting thing about the courts, because again, I've been at this for a while, like you have, and I can already see the comments. Well, the courts are crooked, and the court's this, and the court's that. I don't know this for a fact. This is just anecdotal. I don't have any data to show this, but I would bet you money, if I had any, I'd bet you money that that there are still activist judges out there, but I would also bet you that they're not the majority. I would also, my sense is that by virtue of this decision, many of these cases will be settled at the lower courts and never go much higher, because the Supreme Court has so well armed us with this thing that it's going to be difficult to move them past the lower courts. I think we will have the occasional activist judge or activist circuit that makes goofy decisions, and then that's going to take longer to resolve. But I'm hopeful. I started to say confident. That's probably too big a word. I'm hopeful that in the next few months, we're going to see a lot of these things just crushed at the lower level, and we'll see a few of them get beyond that. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it depends on, just how recalcitrant the Democrats want to be here. Because if they just look, they can appeal these cases knowing that if they get up to the Supreme Court, they're going to lose. If they get a decision, at the trial level and they don't like it, they can still kick it up to the Court of Appeals and hope that they get a judge that'll stay the decision, keep the gun control law in question in place in the meantime. And I think we're going to see just an awful lot of that. These just delaying tactics that serve no other purpose than to make it as hard as possible to exercise a civil right for as long as they possibly can do it. I think in a way they're going through the stages of grief, because like their gun control dreams are dead.
Better them than us. That's all I got to say.
Yeah, and I think that they are grieving. And at first there is that shock, and then there is the denial, and then there is the anger, and eventually you start to move towards acceptance. And I hope for everybody's sake that they get to acceptance as quickly as possible, because, these folks right now, and I mean, as long as they take this position, they're on the wrong side of the Constitution and they're on the wrong side of history. And I don't wish anybody to be in that position. But it also, again, makes our job more difficult. And most importantly, it puts real Americans at risk, because they are still unable to, in some cases, even, keep a gun in their home without going through these ridiculous tests of, give me your character references. And I want to be able to talk to people that know, how honest you are. I've talked before. I think I've even talked before about this with you, Joel. But like the first time I even became really acquainted with the Second Amendment was when I was talking to the woman who eventually I got married to 25 years ago. And I lived in Oklahoma City. She lived in Camden. We met in the early days of the dial-up internet. And, she was a single mom in Camden for 9 years when it was the murder capital of the United States. And New Jersey made it virtually impossible for her. She didn't ever try to get a gun like that. She wasn't a gun person at the time. But if she had wanted one, she couldn't have gotten one legally. There's no way. She didn't have a car. She relied on public transportation. I'm not sure that the Camden County Police would have accepted any of her character references, given that they lived in the same housing project that she did. They put up so many barriers. She was an hourly wage worker. It would have taken at least 2 days off of work for her just to navigate the bureaucracy to fill out her application and be interviewed. Again, you're right that these politicians, they don't care about the cost. They feel good that they're saving people from themselves, but they don't think about the damage that's actually being done. The people who are being put in jail or in prison for exercising a constitutional right, and the people who are left in a precarious situation because they're unable to exercise a constitutional right. And that's why this fight is so important. This isn't about theory. This isn't about philosophy. This is about saving people's lives. This is about our right of self-defense, and politicians who would take that from us because they think they know what's best for us more than we do ourselves.
I think this is where I finally get to disagree with you.
Okay.
Hey, but only partially.
Okay.
I think you're right. I think on our side, it's not about theory. It's not about ideology, but I think on their side it is. It has become, many of these things, these control things have become an ideology for them. And it's interesting to me as I look at the folks that adhere to these things, they adhere to so many of these very overreaching, controlling ideologies. And it's essentially an ideology that says, we know better than you do, and you're too stupid to figure it out. So we're going to make sure that we take care of you, and we're going to make you do what we know you should be doing that's right. Mm-hmm. That's an ideological thing. For some, it has become so strongly ideological that I think it's become a bit of a religion.
Yes.
And so I think for them, it is an ideology. I think for them, it is theoretical because in a lot of these people's cases, they've never faced danger in their entire lives. They're surrounded by, they don't have to worry about carrying a gun because they're surrounded by guns carried by other people all the time. And that's a lifestyle I can't identify with, but what that tells me is, and I certainly don't begrudge them that. If you're successful and you've gotten to that point, good for you. But at the same time that's a lifestyle I cannot identify with, it puts them in a position where they can no longer identify with mine. And as a result, they can't identify with the needs of the average person, of the middle class person, of the upper middle class person, of the person who lives in a lower socioeconomic neighborhood and they're making hourly wages working as a security guard or at the fast food joint or the local store or whatever. They're not in that position anymore, and in many cases, they either never have or haven't been in so long they can't even figure out what it's like. They have no idea how much a carton of eggs cost. They have no idea what it costs to go into the store and buy something. They don't even know what gas costs because somebody else takes the car and fills it up, and they don't even know how to drive. In many cases, these people haven't driven themselves around in decades. So this is a different mindset of controlling the little people because you're smarter and better than they are. And to a degree, I think it is ideological. Anyway, that's just my opinion. So we can agree to disagree if you need to.
I agree with you. It is ideological for them. I don't think it is ideological for us.
No, I think it's just real.
Absolutely. And look, are there people who support gun control for whom it is not an ideology? Yes. Although I would argue that those are the folks who generally support gun control when it's in the news, when we've had a horrific tragedy, and these are the folks who really, at the end of the day, they just want to do something. What they hear a lot about is gun control is the answer, and they go, okay, that sounds good to me. I think those folks are a different animal than the folks that you just talked about, the hardcore ideologues. And again, I think that those folks are also way more approachable than the ideologues. Because at the end of the day, they too are interested in safety, and they're not necessarily interested in doing it by, disarming us all and hoping for the best. The ideologues that you talk about, you're right. And I think you described the motivation for them very well. In many cases, I don't think it is outright animosity towards the rest of us, although in some cases it might be. But I think in many cases it is simply that that they no longer have that connection. And they do look at the rest of us as people who need to be controlled, people who don't know what's best for us, people who, if we're just allowed to live our best lives, oh my gosh, the chaos and the horror that would ensue. And so, of course, we need to be directed by these folks who have managed to achieve such greatness in their own lives. I live on a farm in the middle of nowhere for a reason, because I don't like those people very much. Although we've even got a couple of them out here.
I have 40 acres in the middle of nowhere in the mountains of Arizona for that reason, because I got to go and get away from it once in a while. So I totally get it.
And we got to listen. We got a couple of those folks too. There are private jets that fly in and out of the Farmville airport. Hopefully these are nice overlords. But,
overlords. From now on, they're going to be overlords for the rest of time. I'm going to steal that. Thank you very much. These people want to be overlords. Hey, you mentioned
overlords
this.
of their own imagination. Yes.
That's right. I wanted to mention this to you because this is what you were talking about before Chuck's going to come on and talk about. And I think I emailed this to you. This hit today. And so I'll read it real quick, and let me put it up. I can put it up on the screen. So Cam, you won't be able to see it, unfortunately, but
that's fine. I've read it.
You've read it anyway, so I'll put it up here, and then I'll put a link to it in the description. Personal data of CCW holders, quote-unquote, accidentally released, and then it asks, is it a coincidence? Just days after last week's court decision in New York State Rifle Pistol Association versus Bruen, Attorney General Rob Bonta's new data portal made public, at least for a limited time, some personal data of every CCW holder in the state, including driver's license numbers, addresses, and more. CRPA is wondering whether this was something that was done intentional, and then, you go, oops, sorry. Mm-hmm. I don't know that that's the case, and so I don't want to accuse anybody of it, but knowing the dirty trick squad that we have up in Sacramento, I wouldn't be surprised. And I think it's, if it is intentional, it's unconscionable. You've got you've got people who are carrying, a lot of people prior to this decision, a lot of people got concealed carry permits because they had a need for them. Mm-hmm. And these
are the folks who at least in some counties anyway, were actually able to prove to the satisfaction of anti-gun sheriffs and anti-gun politicians that, okay, fine, you can have a permit.
And they may have been people who have moved 2 or 3 times as a result to try to escape someone, and now their address has just been made public.
Yeah.
So this is a big deal.
It is a big deal. And as you say, we don't know what happened. I did engage in a little speculation at BearingArms this afternoon, and I said I am somewhat doubtful that this would have been done with the approval of Rob Bonta, if only because of the Democratic high-dollar donors in Hollywood and Silicon Valley who are probably included in that list of names who got leaked, right? Like,
oh, you think?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right.
You bet they are.
So the idea that Bonta, who, I think he believes he has a bright future in California politics, would tick off the donor base by exposing their personal information. I have a hard time seeing that, but some anti-gun zealot working in the AG's office who just decided to make this information public to teach those gun owners a lesson, that sounds really plausible to me. That sounds at least as plausible as this database going through layers of approval in a state agency bureaucracy while still allowing this type of confidential and private information to be accessed by any member of the public. I find it at least as plausible that there was a bad actor in the AG's office who decided to do this on their own. With the help of others.
And almost in every respect, not just where Second Amendment is concerned, I just have trouble believing in coincidences anymore. it just doesn't seem like they actually happen as often as we think they happen. Things happen for a reason, and sometimes it's because people are motivated politically to do this or that. So I'm in agreement with you. I think A.G. Bonta would be cutting his own throat to have chosen to do that himself. But I wouldn't put it past a low-tier staffer or somebody in the middle who doesn't know any better just making it available briefly. But the result could be rather horrific.
Yes.
I mean, it's a very big deal. I did go on it to see if I could pull the data now, but at this point I wasn't able to. But I'm not exactly a computer whiz. But I guess the question is, how do you see these kinds of things happening in this battle? You mentioned earlier, you said a great word about this. You said these people are desperate. Well, in my experience, desperate people do really desperate things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I am worried about this. I listen, every data breach like this, every unconscionable delay in the issuing of a permit to purchase or a license to carry or a FOID card, all of these things, I think, make the argument that you and I both believe that the Second Amendment is your permit. And Justice Thomas and Justice Kavanaugh both alluded to the fact that just because a system is shall issue doesn't mean that it can't be abused. And that doesn't mean that these abuses can't be challenged. And so my advice to these gun control activists would be, if you don't want to see shall issue laws overturned, shape up and fly right. Because otherwise, that's likely to be what happens. If you abuse the shall issue system, if you show that you can't be trusted with the limited responsibility that the Supreme Court has said you can have, don't be surprised if that authority goes away completely.
I want to make sure we've talked a lot about the negatives here, and I want to make sure there's a positive in here too, because we have mentioned those. And you're Mr. Positive. What the heck happened to you? The last time you were on my show, I had to work to get you to be negative about anything. This time around, you're like, oh, okay. So now I'm going to be Mr. Positive. I'm stealing the thunder. It's my show. Okay. Look, Chuck was on the show, Chuck Michelle, a while back, and he said this, and I thought it's a kind of an old way of saying things, but it's very true, I think, in this regard, that this decision was not the beginning of the end. It was the end of the beginning. And what I mean by that is that we all knew, and I don't know that the average gun owner realized, but I think that those of us who are involved in this all the time realized that the moment this decision came down, if it came down the way we hoped, and like I said, it did, that it was a great tool. It was a wonderful, for lack of a better word, a wonderful weapon, a tool in the toolbox to go fight for the rest of the rights and get some of these unconstitutional laws, maybe most of them, hopefully all of them, eventually thrown out. But that it was going to be a fire that lit a fight that was going to go on for a while. That it was the end of the beginning. We did the beginning, which got us to this point, so that we were armed and able to go to court and really fight, and the teeth are back in the Second Amendment. The court put the teeth back in the Second Amendment is what they did. Mm-hmm. We've been fighting on gums alone, gumming these things, trying to put it to bite on it a little bit. We couldn't do anything. Now we've got some teeth back in the amendment, which means we're not at the beginning anymore. Now we're in the middle. That was the end of the beginning. Mm. Now we're in the middle. We're still fighting. We're not at the end. I think it's important to look at it that way, because if we don't, then it's a very good thing it's an easy thing to say, okay, well, we won.
Right.
Where's my beer?
Yeah.
Right.
Well, listen,
and if we do that,
you're
we're
doing
in trouble.
that right now, you're not reading the news, because clearly that's not the case. Right. But as you say, it's also easy to say, okay, so what changed? And that, I think, is exactly why you're spot on, Joel, because listen, and I hope that most gun owners get it. I think that most gun owners do. If you're not willing to play the long game, you're in the wrong kind of activism, man, because we've been doing this for decades. And you're right. This is, and I think Chuck's right, that this is the end of the beginning, or he maybe even said to me yesterday, this may be the end of the middle. We now may actually be going towards the end game. And I will say this. I think what the Second Amendment looks like, what the Second Amendment legal landscape looks like 10 years from now, is going to be much more solid. I mean, unless the Democrats again take control of Congress, nuke the filibuster, pack the court, in which case all bets are off. But if we continue on this trajectory, then 10 years from now, a lot of these issues that we have been fighting for decades will have been resolved in our favor. They will be settled law. As settled as law can be in this day and age. And we're going to be on a much firmer footing. So I do agree with you. And again, the Bruen decision is hugely important. It really is a game changer. And if I came across as too pessimistic or negative today, that was not my intention, because I
was just picking on you because I don't get to talk to you very much. So I got to give you some grief once in a while, right? How often do we talk, brother? If I see you and I don't give you some grief, you're going to think I don't love you anymore.
All right. Well, listen, I'm just saying I am very enthusiastic, but you're right. This isn't the end. This is a new chapter. We're getting towards the end of the book. The footnotes are in sight, but we do have a way to go. And again, I think with what we've been given with the Bruen decision, we're going to win a heck of a lot more of these fights than they are. But it is going to take some time, I think, for the dust to settle and for them to, again, hopefully accept, as difficult as it might be for them, that yes, we have a right to keep, we have a right to bear, and that's not going away, and we're not giving it up.
And here's a shameless plug, because I can. Because, gosh darn it, fighting against this stuff costs money. And so don't forget to contribute to organizations that are fighting. Pick one you like the best.
Yep.
And, I would say look at them and see what they're doing. Make sure they're doing something, but pick one that you like the best and support that one. If you have the wherewithal to support a lot of them, then do that. I would urge you to support BearingArms, because honestly, you're going to find a lot of news there that you wouldn't find elsewhere, and without them, you won't. Because it does cost money to run a website. Cam is still, he and his wife still living on franks and beans because they can't make any money doing this. No, you got to support these folks. They're fighting for your rights. So I urge you to do that, and make sure that we're keeping them in our prayers as well if you're a praying person, and make sure that you're staying informed, because not being informed is really, really hard on you. It's aggravating and you get mad and so on. But if you know what's going on, like, for example, I pulled this thing. I'll put a link to it if you like in the description, but I pulled this off the web, this big long list of all these cases that are sitting at the court waiting to be decided. You look through them and you go, wow, there's a lot of work that's already been done. Now it's just a matter of courts actually looking at these based upon the instructions they were just given by the Supreme Court. And that may change the trajectory of where these go. And every time we get a win, that adds an additional story, an additional piece of case law to the strength of the Second Amendment. So this is going to take a while. It's not going to happen overnight. Your rights aren't going to be restored in places like California sometime tomorrow afternoon. It's going to take a while. We're going to have to drag them kicking and screaming into compliance with the Second Amendment. But the court now gave us the tools with which to do it. So I encourage you not to give up. Please do not stop. Please keep supporting BearingArms, California Rifle and Pistol Association, GOA, pick one, the Firearms Policy Coalition, whatever you feel is the best organization for you. And I can share with you that $2 goes a long way. I used to say to people, look, take that $7 you paid for a cup of coffee and give it to a gun rights organization. Now I'll say, take that $7 you paid for a gallon of gas. It's terrible, but it's true. All right, my friend, last word. You get it. Anything else we should talk about we didn't?
Boy, I don't know. I feel like this has been a wide-ranging discussion.
You're on my show. It's always a wide-ranging discussion.
I'm gonna leave it there, buddy. But I really thank you for the invite. I always enjoy our conversations, and I hope I get a chance to do this again very soon. And thank you for everything that you do, because you are a fantastic voice for the Second Amendment community in terms of presenting news and information in an outlook that I just think is grounded in reality. I wish we had. I wish this country, not just this movement, but I wish this country had a lot more of people like you that we do.
I appreciate that. And normally when people say things like that to me, I just say thank you. But I want to share this, if I may. I came from a generation where I was taught, I grew up around people from the greatest generation. I'm a boomer. And you can say, okay, boomer, if you want to. People say that to me all the time. But I was taught that debate, discussion was a good thing. I was taught that difference of opinion was a good thing, because if we have differing opinions and we can discuss them like grown-ups and we can debate them like grown-ups, sometimes we can change the other person's mind. Sometimes our own mind is changed. Sometimes we learn something. But in all times, if we can just learn to agree to disagree and not be disagreeable, this would be a different country. It would be a different society, and it would be a different world. Somehow we've lost the ability to do that. Everything is a knee-jerk reaction. Everything is an emotional response. Everything is vitriol and venom. I'm here to tell you, I've been married a long time. I've raised children. I'm a grandfather, and I can tell you that having been married to the same woman for a long time, I have 3 women in my life, a wife, a mistress, and a girlfriend. Same woman. That's how I stay out of trouble, okay? But I've learned over those years that emotions are real, but they're not necessarily accurate. So if everything we do is based upon our emotional response to things, we're going to do things that we regret a lot. My hope is if you're another video presenter, you're a blogger, you're a podcaster or something, that we can agree to tone it down just a bit and help each other understand where we can go from here without the anger and without the vitriol. We can't expect everybody to do that. And there are going to be people who go out and burn things and riot and so on, but that doesn't mean that we have to do that too. We can be the adults in the room. I know the left always talks about the adults in the room. Well, to be honest with you, they're very seldom the adults in the room. I wish they were. Some are, but not very many. If we can be the adults in the room, maybe that would help. So that's all I try to do with this show, Cam. I just try to be one of the adults in the room, and I know you do too, and I'm very grateful for you. It's one of the reasons I love to have you on the show. That, and frankly, you're positive, and you're funny. And you have a bigger beard than me. And I'm looking forward to... Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, you made me sound like I'm transitioning into Santa Claus. I'm jolly. Always got a positive outlook and a great big beard. So I can think of worse things, honestly.
Yeah, as long as you don't grow the belly that goes with it, you're good to go.
Well, it's a good thing we're cutting off right about here.
Yeah, that's why I put the camera. If I put the camera here, I look so much better from here up. Brother, have a wonderful week. Thank you so very much for all that you do, and I really appreciate you coming on the show. We will do it again very, very soon, and I just appreciate you being willing to come on the show at such short notice. I know your schedule's nuts.
Yeah, man, I'm always available. Anytime you want to talk. Again, I love being here. Thanks for the invite. Have a good week, man.
You too, sir. Bye-bye. Thank you very much for watching the whole interview. I mean, these things are long. I get it. But there's a lot of information in them, and I think it's important for us to have. So I'm very grateful that you stuck all the way through. I do urge you, as I did in the video, to please support your local organization, whatever that may be, whichever one is your favorite gun rights organization. Make sure you support them, because we're at a point now where we've really got the ammunition to go knock down these anti-gun laws and to fight back in ways we've never been able to do before. But it still costs money, and it still takes work. So don't give up, don't stop fighting, and keep contributing to make that happen. And do support Cam Edwards and the work he does over at BearingArms with Cam & Company. If you'd like to support GunGuyTV, you're welcome to do that by supporting me and just joining GunGuyTV Crew. It's a place where I publish exclusive content pretty regularly, and I use it really as my primary social media place. And that is where I'm going to post things that are going to keep you informed on a regular basis. You also have direct access to me there, which, in case you want that, and a lot of people do, to ask me questions. You have no idea. As I said earlier, my phone blew up and everything else blew up when this court decision came down. You'll find that by going to GunGuyTVCrew.com, or you can just go to the link in the description. Have a great week. Thank you for all of your support, and wherever you go, whatever you do, stay safe.